Right? Yeah, why are you, what are you saying, Father David? Did anybody here come from a long way away? Ottawa, Canada? Where'd you come from? Seattle, all right. Are you a Doxacon Seattle attendee?
No, never heard about it.
We have one in Seattle, you know. We're good? That's awesome. And where'd you come from? South Bend, Indiana. Respectable, middle of the country. Very good. Anybody else want to brag? Yeah. Tennessee. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, God bless you, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. Whether it was from a long way or from just around the corner with our Washington, D.C. traffic, it feels like a journey. So as we say in Virginia, but it's true here in Maryland, welcome to Maryland. You're now an hour from Maryland. So let me properly invite you all here with my little speech prepared. Klingons and Kryptonians, Narnians and Noldor, Baronis and Beltalowda. Whatever your fiction, whatever your fandom, you are welcome here. You are home. You are at Doxacon. So welcome back. And if it's your first time, welcome. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you make some friends, have some awesome conversations, hear some wonderful reflections. That's the whole point of this event, is to be a venue in which Christians can come together and talk about weird things, fantasy and science fiction and the things that we enjoy in the privacy of our homes, but to reflect on them in a Christian way, to find the gospel hiding in them. Because wherever there's truth, wherever there's good, wherever there's beauty, there's the Lord. And even in places that maybe other people have written off as irredeemable. So tonight, I am extraordinarily happy to welcome our clergy keynote for 2022, Father Turbo Qualls. Father Turbo is a priest of St. Mary of Egypt Orthodox Church in Kansas City, Missouri. He's been there about 7 years, 6. And Father Turbo comes to us from the Serbian Orthodox Church. Diocese is a Midwest diocese. He is an iconographer and an artist. He is the spiritual director for the St. Elizabeth Sisterhood, which is an urban monastic community, and is also the Mount Tabor School of Liberal Arts, which provides classical education that is rooted in Orthodox tradition. When he's not doing all that, his other job is working in addictions and pastoral care and nonprofit organizations and so forth, in which he holds graduate and postgraduate degrees. But the reason Father Turbo is here, besides all of his wonderful qualifications as a pastor and a priest, is he has a podcast called The Royal Path, where he basically chats with, are they your parishioners or your spiritual sons? Two of the spiritual sons, and they just chew the fat about whatever it is that week, and it's kind of, something they do late at night, and then they post it. And I was catching an episode of it, and he started dropping pop culture references that I had never heard a priest ever mention, and I said, he's one of us. And I was like, Father, you want to come and talk at Doxacon and do whatever you like. Do whatever you like. He's like, yeah, okay. And then he totally blew my mind just yesterday as we were talking, because he said, Father, don't be mad at me, but I've changed my topic. And then he told me what he's talking about, and he was like right straight to my heart, right to my 15-year-old self back in high school, the kind of things that I read and played and did all those things with. So I'm super excited to introduce you to him. Before you start, let's say a prayer, why don't we? And if you all stand. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, who are present everywhere, fulfilling all things, treasury of blessings and source of life, come abide in us, cleanse us of all stain, and save our souls. a good one. Through the prayers of our holy fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. With no further ado, Father Turbo. And we'll for questions when he's done with the main part of the talk, and we'll put the microphone up here so you can come right up and don't be shy and ask your questions, okay?
Do I need to play with this? Okay. How's that? Okay. Okay. High tech. Great. 1 second here. Okay. Well, thank you, Father, for inviting me, and it's really great to be here. You know, I struggled quite a bit, actually, with this talk because what do you talk about? You know, there's so much, and especially because so much of my life has been formed in fandom, pop culture, like most of us, all of our lives. But it's tough because when you have so many different areas, you know, I debated about talking about kind of like a shotgun approach, talking about all the different aspects. I have, you know, my fingers in all kinds of fandom. And so I was going to kind of try to weave everything. It was kind of ambitious, but then, you know, as it kind of went forward more and more, I realized I think what's really important in being like, you know, undeservedly the keynote or the clergy keynote speaker, I said, you know, I really have to bring something together that I think could serve all of us, you know, all of us. And what I mean by that is those of us who have faith in Christ, but also find ourselves, you know, kind of gleaning these fields of pop culture. And really, you know, there isn't some kind of manual, you know, and so not that I'm trying to present a manual, but from experience, I want to share with you how, in a very profound and deep way, fandom has inspired me, has in many ways even helped to save my life. And it's something that I apply even to my own children. And so I hope that what I'm going to provide for you guys will be beneficial in some way to kind of continue to enjoy all the fantastic things that we enjoy, but enjoy it in such a way that it can, you know, not be necessarily in vain. It can produce fruit in our lives, okay? So my talk is called Out of the Darkness, the Redemption Found in the Anti-Hero. So it's going to be broken up in a couple of different sections. The first is going to be my personal journey, because what is fandom without personal journey, right? So it's going to be my personal journey to and through. And then that's very important, to and through the mechanism of the anti-hero. And then the next part will be my encounter with these particular anti-heroes that I'm kind of holding up as a kind of, you know, the zenith of the anti-hero in my mind. And then I'm going to close with what is the place of the anti-hero in the life of the Christian. So it's ambitious, but not as ambitious as the talk I was going to give before. But first, let me kind of offer to you guys two key things that I have learned to use and almost in some regard kind of retroactively apply to my life. And this helps me to really, not just with pop fandom, but with many things in my life to help kind of integrate, because in the Orthodox spiritual tradition, really you could sum up the life in all kinds of ways, but one way I try to sum it up for people is integration. It's about learning to have your whole life be integrated in that, You know, we live in a world where dichotomies are inserted into our lives, if you understand what I'm saying. And what happens is that these dichotomies cause fissures and fractures, and those fissures and fractures begin to have our lives fall apart. And so the tradition, my experience of the tradition and life in the church, even before being a priest, just being an Orthodox Christian, is that the removal of these dichotomies are important because the integration that comes from the removal of these dichotomies allows the whole of your life experience to be summative. Is this making sense? Okay. So in Jeremiah 15:19, it says, "Therefore, this is what the Lord says, if you return, then I will restore you. You will stand before me, and if you extract the precious from the worthless, you will become my spokesman. They, for their part, may turn to you, but as for you, you are not to turn to them. To extract what can be useful to contemplation, salvation, and thanksgiving is to recognize the lordship of Christ. It can be an act of profound worship because it requires a significant measure of humility and personal sacrifice, and ultimately the greatest amount of trust in his power to save us." Now, this is something that I teach all my spiritual children because I think it's something that in our time, in modernity, we need to learn this skill. There are pearls hidden everywhere, but you have to learn to kind of rummage through the refuse in order to get them. And so what happens for a lot of people, they have not been given the skill set, or they haven't inculcated in themselves the endurance to kind of go through the muck, if you will, to get that pearl of wisdom. And so being able to separate the precious from the worthless is something that I think all Christians have been called to do, but in particular in this day of modernity, it's really important to be able to do this. And this will begin, hopefully, because we're going to dive into some dark places where I'm going to take you. And this needs to be in the background of your mind, this, learning the skill set of being able to separate the precious from the worthless. The second one, Psalm 141:4, it says, "Do not let my heart be drawn to what is evil, so that I take part in wicked deeds along with those who are evildoers. Do not let me eat their delicacies." The discernment needed to extract the precious from the worthless is gained from the desire to not indiscriminately eat of the delicacies, quote, of the world. We do not glean truth outside of Christ, only new ways to understand and articulate truth. Now, I stand by this pretty firmly because when you are swimming through the dirty mire, if you don't have your lodestone, if you don't have your eye fixed on where you need to go, it's the easiest thing to get lost. And so understanding that Christ being that pearl, and what you're looking for and what you're extracting from all the various kind of off-color things that we may find or find that has taken our interest, it's not giving us new truth, but a different way to articulate truth. And this distinction, I think, is important because there is a reality of receiving false light. There is a reality of receiving things that are that feel as if they're presenting us as truth, but they're not really true. So this discernment process is important. And so it's understanding that what you're gaining is a new way to articulate and experience truth, not necessarily some new truth, okay? So, my origin story. Let me give you a little brief synopsis. I grew up in a town, a city in Southern California in the late 70s and in the 80s. And I grew up in what I would call a true minority context because when I say this to you, it may sound incredible, but it's the truth. My family, the city was Garden Grove, California. Unless someone tells me otherwise, my family was the first black family that moved to that city. And so I was born in 76. I've been around. I've yet to someone challenge that. So until someone challenges it and, and sends me an email, I'm sticking by it, right? So my family was the first black family in Garden Grove, Southern California. And so,
I spent time in Garden Grove.
yeah. Oh, homegirls, as we say. You guys are my homegirls. So, yeah, so to say this, some people might go like, that's crazy, but it's not that, that was my reality. And so understanding that I grew up in a very kind of organic, self-conscious way, if that makes sense, you know? And so I went to, my father had the wherewithal to send me to a private school, but he didn't send me there for religious reasons. He sent me there kind of more for like education and more to kind of do better for his son. So this is the context I grew up in. And this disconnect, it definitely left a void. Because the void wasn't just necessarily seeing other people, you know, other black people, quote unquote. It was also trying to navigate, you know, the absence of family connection. You know, it was just my immediate family. I'm the baby of 4, but really it was my older sister and I, and my mom and my dad. So when you don't have something, you become aware of it. But I will just tell you, you know, working with people who have suffered from trauma, one of the things that I look to see who's more resilient than others are what kind of support systems did they have. You know, a person who has the support system of an immediate family, but also extended family, they're much more likely to process difficult situations than someone who doesn't have that. So my lack of kind of extended family and contact, it left a void that may or may not seem reasonable to you, but it was very real for me. So that's important because when you take in mind the time that I grew up, I began to find nature abhors a vacuum, right? And so if there's an absence, it's going to be filled by something. So for me, it was, you know, pop culture. I grew up in a time when, you know, I grew up in a really interesting space in regards of, I saw the kind of advent of, you know, classic fantasy. I saw things like Kiss. You know, this was really big and popular, bigger than life stuff. Color TV was a thing. You know what I mean? I mean, these are things that, you know, some of you of a younger generation may not understand the impact of these images being able to come to me, but they're huge and they filled that gap. So it was also a very interesting time also where you had the kind of fallout from the 60s. People were disillusioned from all the kind of like happy-go-lucky kind of aspects of the 60s. There was dark things in regards of kind of on the political level, but in regards of culturally, people were kind of disillusioned with that. And so there was kind of like a darkness that kind of came in. And I mean things like, you know, Kiss, obviously, a lot of music that I grew up with, you know, gothic and death rock music, which was, you know, great. It really inspired me. It gave me a space to kind of like enter into an escape. Interestingly enough, this is also a time when the anti-hero began to rise in our popular culture. So as you can see here, there's this, The Dark Knight and Wolverine, both of them by Frank Miller, by the way. Frank Miller, you can point to as really the kind of progenitor of the anti-hero as we understand it now. And I stand by that as well, you know. Big influence. But another influence on me was the rise of like Arthurian myth and this kind of like wake of Tolkien influencing culture. What a lot of people don't realize is at that time, there was this resurgence in the love of Tolkien, and it was influencing a lot of like, you know, metal bands and rock bands, prog bands. And so that influence was just, I was swimming in it, if that makes sense. I was swimming in it. So it began to really fill in these gaps that I was talking about. Everybody follow me so far? Okay. What was also happening in the early 80s and 90s was there was a new identity for African Americans forming. Now, take in mind, you know, for me to find myself to be the only quote-unquote black guy in the room was the norm. It was the norm. So on top of all that, there's moments like the LA riots were happening, right? And gangster rap came out. And it began to really stick itself to what would be called, you know, quote-unquote black identity. And so I found myself now even more, if you will, uncomfortable and at odds, because something inside me intuitively didn't resonate with what was being put out in TV. Something intuitively inside me didn't resonate with what people thought should be resonating with me. And as I watched people around me who weren't black taking up certain affect, it puzzled me even more because I'm like, look, you know, my family is from LA and I don't even act that way or do that way. Why are you, guy from Garden Grove, acting this way? Right? It was bizarre. And on top of all that, I was a royal nerd. I was a nerd long before it was cool. So being the only black guy and having kind of like a weird family, but on top of that, being a nerd, it heightened my self-consciousness. It exacerbated my need to escape, right? Because I wasn't getting any chicks, right? This put me in the toughest of spots. But something very interesting came to me. And I look back now and I see, and this is the phrase I'm about to say now, some people at first may not be able to accept what I'm about to say, but hopefully at the end of this, you'll be able to accept what I'm about to say. God brought something to me. I didn't see it at the time. It took me for a long time to see it as God, but God allowed something to come to me. So maybe another way to say it is, God may not have directly brought this to me, but he definitely used it to call me to himself. Let's put it that way. All of these things set me up and introduced me to this next portion where I'm going to introduce to you this tale of 3 blades and 2 heroes. Sword and philosophy. Sword and philosophy. I found in the novels primarily of Michael Moorcock and his Eternal Champion series, I found in them, and primarily the main character of this series, Elric of Melniboné, a kindred. I found in him a way in which I could move forward. I found in him something that articulated my experience in a way that I hadn't found it before. And subsequently, that gave me a taste for a character, an anti-hero, which then allowed me to discern and to taste Drizzt Do'Urden. So now I'm going to talk about these 2 anti-heroes. I'm going to share with you and introduce to you these 2 anti-heroes who are so pivotal, not just in I think, my formation, but in many ways. I know this is going to be an extreme statement, but in many ways, my salvation. Because God has used them to help me to be pulled out of the darkest of places. I want to break down the anti-hero a little bit before we get into that to give you guys a context and a kind of a lexicon, if you will. That's what we're talking about. Anti-hero. A protagonist who lacks conventional, heroic qualities. Number 2, a hero whose actions are questionable. I'm leaning very strongly on what would be considered a Racinian anti-hero. And the Racinian anti-hero is defined by a couple factors. The key ones are they are doomed to fail before their adventure begins. Doomed to fail. Number 2, the blame of that failure lies outside of themselves. And number 3, they offer a critique of social morals and reality. Okay? So first, we will talk about Elric. Elric is the last emperor of the stagnating island civilization of Melniboné. Physically weak, the anemic Elric must use special drugs to maintain his health and vitality. From childhood, he read freely in the immense royal library and learned of the world outside of the dreaming isle. Perhaps due to this in-depth study, unlike other members of his race, Elric has a conscience. He witnesses the decadence of his culture, which once ruled the world, and worries about the rise of the young kingdoms which are populated by humans, which the Melnibonians consider themselves separate from. along with the threat they pose to his empire. And because of Elric's introspective self-loathing and hatred of his Melnibonian traditions, his subjects find him odd and unfathomable. In addition to his skill with herbs, Elric is an accomplished sorcerer and a summoner. And as Emperor of Melnibone, Elric is able to call for aid upon the traditional patron of the Melnibonian emperors, Arioch, a lord of chaos and a duke of hell. From the first story, Elric uses ancient pacts and agreements with not only Arioch, but various other beings, some gods, some demons, to help him accomplish his tasks. Elric's discovery of the sword Stormbringer serves as both his greatest asset and disadvantage. The sword confers upon Elric strength, health, and fighting prowess, allowing him to do away with his dependency on drugs, but it must be fed by the souls of intelligent beings. In the end, the blade takes everyone close to Elric, and eventually Elric's own soul as well. For me, Elric became, and still in many ways, when I look at these images, it reminds me of times in which I was protected from very difficult situations, and in many ways protected from myself. And this reality of being protected from oneself, I'm going to talk at depth about. I'm going to give a little brief overview. Many of you probably have never even heard of Elric or Michael Moorcock's work, but in a kind of summative sense, there's a couple key things to understand about this series, and in particular, it's very anti-Tolkien. It isn't, and what I mean by that is one of the things we all love about Tolkien is his propensity for world building. You know, there's so much time being spent in building the world. Mr. Moorcock doesn't mess around with any of that. He goes straight into who the character is, straight into what we call in media res. You almost find yourself kind of in the middle of the action. You find yourself already in the midst of it. It has a very sad overtone, which was very, in many ways, very therapeutic for me as a young, tortured soul. It allowed me a space in which I was able to kind of experience what was going on with myself, but in an introspective way. It didn't foster any type of externalizing it, but allowed me to be very looking at myself. And there is, a multiverse aspect to this, world of Elric. There's some key things here in regards to his story in particular. Number one, there's this strong theme of fatalism and tragedy. Let me read this quote from you to illustrate what I mean. Elric knew that everything that existed had its opposite. In danger, he might find peace, and yet, of course, in peace, there was danger. Being an imperfect creature in an imperfect world, he would always know paradox. And that was why in paradox there was always a kind of truth. That was why philosophers and soothsayers flourished. In a perfect world, there would be no place for them. In an imperfect world, the mysteries were always without solution, and that was why there was always a great choice of solutions. Man was not born to a world of justice, but he can create such a world. That quote really gives you a snapshot of the type of movements that began to happen inside of me. Because as I began to reflect in this tension of being in a world that I found to be at best distasteful, and being in many ways forced to exist in this world in a way and in a capacity that I did not want to exist, it began to become a hell in of itself. And I began to long for a way out of it. Another aspect of Elric was that he wished to rid himself of doom, this kind of overhanging doom that was always chasing him. And he lamented the doom that he brought others. And there's this word here I have called choiceful, and I'll bring that up later. But it's important to understand this because this understanding, this kind of self-awareness of being stuck, again, I can't enforce this enough. And I've now, since being a priest and being a father, I'm not the only one who's had this experience of this chasing me. And there is a way out. And I think this is the thing that's so important. Another aspect of Elric's life that spoke to me so profoundly was he wanted no part of his people's corrupt and cruel culture. Another quote said, Elric knew that in reality, chaos was the harbinger of stagnation, for though it changed constantly, it never progressed. The Melnibonians were people who had been in pacts with these lords of chaos. The world of Elric is divided essentially into lords of law and lords of chaos, these gods of order and gods of chaos. And his people had sworn themselves for eons to these lords of chaos. And Elric is at the end of this line. He's looking at the reality of what it means to be given over to chaos. And it's funny because Father and I were talking about an early work that he did. And I didn't want to say it at the time, Father, but I did a report very similar about it, on Nietzsche in regards of looking at Apollo and Dionysius. And I can tell you that this kind of Dionysian view is essentially a lord of chaos, essentially. And this is also the view that our society is thrown into. So I will share this with you. There's some obvious correlations that I have drawn for you in regards of, existing as an African American in a time where African American culture had begun to take a very sharp nosedive. But I also share this with you. We're all children of an empire. And we're all children of an empire that is seeing itself take on these overtones, which many of us, those of us who have faith, are questioning and wondering why, what is happening. So I think this is another area in which the anti-hero in Elric is very important. Another aspect was that his existential quest is his true motivation. As opposed to other characters who are seeking, riches or a kingdom or power for the sake of power, Elric's motivation was it was one of an existential nature. Another quote said, "For the mind of man alone is free to explore the lofty vastness of the cosmic infinite, to transcend ordinary consciousness, to roam the secret corridors of the brain where past and future melt into one. And universe and individual are linked, the one mirrored in the other, and the each contains the other. Despairingly sometimes I seek the comfort of a benign God, Srila. My mind goes out, lying awake at night, searching through the black barrenness for something, anything, which will take me to it, warm me, protect me, tell me that there is order in the chaotic tumble of the universe, that it is consistent, this precision of the planets, not simply a bright, brief spark of sanity in an eternity of malevolent anarchy. This longing for something good, even though being raised in anything but goodness, spoke to me so profoundly, and I found nothing like it. There was nothing even close that could speak to me on this deep level that I needed to be spoken to. Another aspect of Elric was that The affect, there's an affecting that happens through negation. Another quote. He says, I brought evil to many places, but usually there's already been evil to match mine. I seek no excuses, for I know what I am and I know what I have done. I've slain malignant sorcerers and destroyed oppressors, but I have also been responsible for slaying fine men and a woman, my cousin, whom I loved, I killed, or, as you would see it, my sword did. This type of awareness of there is no kind of black hat and white hat, this horrific reality I could understand. When it was presented to me, this idea of, again, like kind of the good boy cowboy and the bad guy, and then I saw the reality around me that that wasn't the case, that actually the reality was very messy. Elric really helped me to flesh that out, to articulate that. And although we're speaking about fantasy, for me and so for many of us, I'm assuming, it helps to uncover something deep inside of us. How am I doing on time? Okay. I want to share I found this really cool promotion that was done. It was kind of rare. And it's Michael Moorcock actually reading introduction that he wrote specifically for a promotion. So I want to share just a little bit because it's really cool. And it's going to flesh out a little bit more of what Emir was like, the Dreaming City, what the Melnibonian culture was like, and flesh out a little bit of the tension that was lying in the life of Elric.
And so the great emperor received his education. Learning his wizard's craft on the dream couches, where one might live 1,000 years in a single night, Elric was trained in the ancient traditions of Melniboné's sorcerer king. No mortal could learn all there was to learn in a single lifetime, and
So as you can see, the world in which Elric existed was decadent beyond belief, fundamentally corrupt, and the people, his people, they reveled in this corruption. It's interesting, Father and I kind of batted back some things back and forth, but there's so much now in contemporary like pop fandom and fantasy that's inspired actually by Elric. I mean, Father sent it this morning, which is so spot on. There's no Game of Thrones, the Targaryens. There's no House of Dragons without Elric. There's no Witcher. There's so many things that there is no of, because Elric is this kind of like archetype. But even more than that, you know, Elric and this kind of arc of his existence is really an archetype for where many of us find ourselves in our modern society. We find ourselves at odds with something that's deep within us, calling us to a, if you would can imagine, almost like a good that seems disappearing out of the world and being surrounded by an increasing darkness. And this is so strong, especially looking back retroactively. It's like such a strong theme that at the time, I obviously resonated with it, but it's serving me even now. Now, one important aspect about Elric is to understand his sword, Stormbringer, which is an interesting thing because it's really his foil. It's not his cousin, Yorkun. It's not any of the sorcerers who he fights. It's actually his own sword, which is his foil. Stormbringer, also called the Black Blade, the Black Sword, and the Stealer of Souls, is a legendary soul-devouring rune sword carried by Elric. Stormbringer is fully sentient and has a malicious will of its own. Elric's relationship to Stormbringer is fraught with tragedy and foreboding doom. The blade provides him with an ability to live drug-free and fully able, but with the steepest of costs. Elric wields Stormbringer as a means of stopping forces of tyranny and evil, and as a symbol of what I would call and would present to you as anti-venom, which we'll talk about sooner, because I don't really have another word to call it. We'll get into that, but that term anti-venom, it's important, especially for Orthodox Christians. Or the process of curing poison with the very same poison. So Pascha, what do we sing? Christ is trampling down death by death. And this paradox is so important, because if you don't understand this paradox, then you can't really live, at least in our tradition, and from my perspective, you can't really live the life. You have to fully embrace this paradox in order to live the spiritual life. It's through the very thing that you think is destroying you that you'll find life. It's through the very death of your ego, through the very death of what you think is driving you, that you'll find life. Elric taught me this, and this is what I mean by God used this in a way I could not receive it as a young man, but it has served me, and I would say, by extension of that, served my children, my parish, my godchildren, my spiritual children. A couple quotes. Be wary of the double blade, Moonglum. It kills the foe, but savors the blood of friends and kinfolk most. Another quote, I am a man possessed, he groaned, and without this double blade I carry, I will not be a man at all. The symbol of Stormbringer in the life of Elric is profound, because I think that it's easily applied and laid upon so many things in our life, technology. How we as a people are unable to move seemingly further anymore without this technology that empowers us to break the earth, right? To seemingly resurrect the dead, to do all these things that the Melniboians were able to do, but at what cost? At what cost are we able to wield such power in the world that our ancestors would marvel? Our ancestors would look at us and think that we were gods because of the technology we hold, but at what cost? Elric, closing the story of Elric and Stormbringer, was also, I think, fair to say, in many ways, a progenitor of another very famous anti-hero, that of Drizzt Do'Urden of the Forgotten Realms, Drizzt being a dark elf And I'm going to introduce you to Dritz, and then that's going to begin to descend out of the anti-hero and my story of meeting the anti-hero and going through the anti-hero. Doing okay with time real quick? Good. So, Jiz Orden, who comes from the drow city of Menzoberranzan. And the video I just showed gives you the outline, again, of a different world, a different author, Ari Salvatore. But nevertheless, like Elric, coming from a culture coming from a world utterly corrupt and dark, enthralled with the darkness and powered by it. Powered by it. Burning with rebellion, Dritz escapes the Underdark, and his family will never forgive him. Dritz is now building a life of purpose alongside his loyal and trusted friends, the companions of the Hall. And whether he's wielding his magic scimitars, icing death and twinkle against an adversary, or tactically solving an unwinnable scenario, Dritz relishes meeting any worthy challenge. The surface world is filled with dangers and wonders. With allies like the companions at his side, Dritz faces them all with an ardent heart and ready blades. So Dritz, unlike Elric, is a much more classic hero in the sense, but still very much an anti-hero, still very much. He comes from the Forgotten Realms, which some of you may or may not be familiar with, which is classic fantasy. But unlike some of the other Forgotten Realms and classic fantasy of the kind of Dungeons and Dragons kind of moniker, the Dritz character is very much still introspective, like Elric, very much introspective, which I found, again, the connections were very appealing to me. A couple key things about Dritz. He fights against his base nature. When he was moving from Menzabranzan and trying to survive the long trek to the surface world, he developed this kind of hunter state, which was a based state in which he was just become this incredibly powerful, efficient killing machine. And so he learns to fight against this portion of him. And again, choiceful comes up, and don't worry, choiceful will be explained in a minute. Another aspect, he wants no part of his people corrupt and cruel culture like Elric. And a quote, "How much my people have lost by walking in darkness," Dritz whispered into the night. The pull of the mysteries of the endless sky carried the joy of his spirit beyond its normal boundaries and opened his mind to the unanswerable questions of the universe. By living among outcasts, Dritz uncovers and confronts hypocrisy and finds meaning. Another quote, he says, "Beware the engineers of society. I say, who would make everyone in all the world equal. Opportunity should be equal, must be equal, but achievement, that must remain individual." If you notice on the kind of earlier slide, I put this thing like, typically it's sword and fantasy, but sword and philosophy. Sword and philosophy. And this is the thing that spoke to me. There's other fantasy things I had read, but not of this caliber. Not speaking to these kind of like inner movements of a young, confused, and angsty person, right? Rejected also by those of the surface world, Dritz faces prejudice. This is also found in Elric. Elric being despised by the people because they know he's a Melnibonian, but Dritz so much more so because Dritz being a drow, a dark elf, and the drow are unseen in the surface world, and so kind of like shoot-on-sight type of situation is the life that he finds himself in. Dritz also held himself and holds himself to a standard that he refused to put on others. This is where a kind of more classic heroism began to be built into me. Like, I like this. I like this idea of having something, this kind of personal code that I don't need to put on anyone else. One that I will hold myself to, but not others. And this is very much the kind of, if I use the word, the phronema of the Orthodox Church, this understanding of keep your eyes on your own plate. Don't put your judgments on others. Don't expect of others what you're not doing of yourself. Do it yourself. Another quote, he says, and this is a very good one. Dritz said, we of sincere character, that's the key thing, always judge ourselves by stricter standards than we expect of others to abide by. It's almost like an elder could have said that. I love it. It's a great quote. Elric affected and brought affect through negation, pulling away. Dritz brings it through action by engaging, right, by moving into the situation. He said, I could choose what life would be mine. It would be this life that I now have at this time. I am at peace, and yet the world around me swirls with turmoil. with the ever-present threat of barbarian raids and goblin wars, with tundra yetis and gigantic polar worms. The reality of existence here in Icewind Dale is harsh indeed, an environment unforgiving where one mistake will cost you your life. That is the joy of the place, the very edge of disaster, and not because of treachery, as I knew in my home of Menzoberranzan. I can accept the risk of Icewind Dale. I can revel in them and use them to keep my warrior instincts finely honed. I can use them to remind me every day of the glory and joy of life. There is no complacency here. In this place where safety cannot be taken for granted, where a turn of the wind can pile snow over your head, where a single misstep on a boat can put you into water that will steal your breath away and render muscles useless in mere seconds, or a simple lapse on the tundra can put you in the belly of a fierce yeti. When you live with death so close, you come to appreciate life all the more. Powerful. And I would say to you, this is one of the amazing things that we all experience, especially about fantasy, is that it's articulating our reality, but in a way in which we can swallow it. Because we may not be dealing with ice worms or yetis, but how many other foes, how many other things that seem insurmountable to us are we facing daily? And these heroes can in many ways give us a matrix or a way kind of in and out. A real quick word from Dritz. And so when you read Dritz's story, it carries you on through what his life is in these adventures. Now, I spoke to you guys about Elric and his blade, and now Dritz and his two blades, so the two heroes and the three blades, Twinkle and Icing Death. Twinkle and Icing Death are the curved swords of Dritz. Both were gained through the various adventures, and each hold particular attributes that suit his disposition and abilities. Combat in the Dritz stories is dazzling and represents his agency. Twinkle and Icing Death are extensions of Dritz and the symbols of his mastery of self. A good quote, he says, "Luck?" Dritz replied, "Perhaps. But more often I dare to say luck is simply the advantage of a true warrior gains in executing the correct course of action. Another quote, to learn how to use a sword, one must first master when to use a sword. So again, Dritz, like Elric, the sword is a symbol. For Elric, it was this foil. For Dritz, it's his agency. But in both cases, the sword represents something in which, not just great combat, but also this kind of like battle with oneself. Dritz is constantly testing himself, constantly trying to see, can I be better? Can I be better? And Elric is constantly saying, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of this? Right? And the tension of these two, for me, really completed like a whole. They balanced each other out, and they were both anti-heroes that spoke to me a deep need to understand things, to understand myself. Elric and Dritz are two characters that articulated the most nuanced and difficult aspects of life for me. They did something far better than give me answers. They helped give form and shape to the questions that were in my heart, but remained without shape. So oftentimes we're looking for answers, and really what we need is better questions. Those questions for me were, what does it cost to pursue? What does it cost you to pursue truth? Can someone move beyond fate? Are you what others say you are, or is there something deeper, more essential? Now take in mind, this is, a young me. This is a me before Christ. This is a me before adulthood. This is a me disparate, grasping. These are the questions that I had. It seemed as if I had no other choice. Everything that was in front of me, it seemed as if the world had just been given me a script that I was forced to kind of follow. The way they answered these questions, a couple great quotes. The question of what does it cost to pursue truth? These questions, by the way, we're about to see, if these questions weren't posed to me in the way they were, I would have never been able to come to Christ. I would have never been able to become Orthodox. Being willing to sacrifice anything for a life lived honestly. Both Elric and Dritz became objects of scorn and perpetual conflict. From Elric, for this was the other thing that Elric knew, that to compromise with tyranny is always to be destroyed by it. The sanest and most logical choice lay always in resistance. Dritz, he says, he hates me because my way of life shows his to be an empty life. This perpetual conflict of just choosing to live by your conscience. Powerful, powerful icons for me. The other question of can someone move beyond faith? The awareness of the seeming futility of their quests never stopped either Elric or Dritz, and in fact, it emboldened them. From Elric, I have weighed the proof, Shrila, and most believe that anarchy prevails, in spite of all the laws which seemingly govern our actions, our sorcery, our logic. I see only chaos in the world, and if the book we seek tells me otherwise, then I shall gladly believe it. Elric was raised in a culture and in a world where fate ruled, and yet deep down inside, he was always looking to say, no, fate doesn't rule. Fatalism isn't the way. And if I can find it, I'll believe it. This willingness to say, if the truth is presented to me, I'll throw everything away to accept that truth. Dritz, how many people long for that past, simpler and better world? I wonder, without ever recognizing the truth that perhaps it was they who were simpler and better and not the world about them. This understanding that, and this was huge for me, and it's huge now for a lot of my younger spiritual children to help them understand this. So much of your conflict comes from you trying to change the world around you when really you need to change yourself. Dritz and Elric showed this to me. This other question, are you what others say you are? Or is there something deeper and more essential? As anti-heroes, both Elric and Dritz stood against the morality of their respective societies. They reveal that at times one who is seeking truth will be at odds with the world around him, and to compromise is to pay a price worse than death. Elric Kinslayer, he says, you spend your lives chasing that which is within you and that which you can find in any other human being, but you will not look for it there. You must follow more glamorous paths to waste your time in order to discover that you've wasted your time. What a perfect saying for our nihilistic world that says that we are nothing more than the food we eat, the media we consume, and the gas that we burn. As anti-heroes, they articulate spiritual states and realities that without knowing them, I could not have recognized Christ and apprehend orthodoxy. Such things such as suffering, that mysterious word I keep saying, choiceful, redemption, and the anti-venom. Okay? Now, we're descending, and this is where I'll close my talk. We're going to ask this question of what is the place now of the anti-hero in the life of a Christian? We have a real issue, and this real issue is who is Christ? Now, I know much of the quotes that I've shared with you, much of the media that I shared with you, for some of you, God bless you, who are more sensitive of heart and mind, it might be hard to see things so dark. But let me share this with you. Our world is dark. And I think one of the great values of fandom is that it can present to you a reality, like I was saying earlier, that in many ways might be too hard for you to stomach. But you need to know how dark the world really is. Because it's only in that you can begin to apprehend the need of a Savior. This is where the anti-hero becomes necessary, because as a symbol, it reveals suppressed aspects of Christ. Suppressed. I'm about to get into this. What I mean by suppressed. Many people have been given a caricature of Christ. They don't know what Christianity is because of that. And so, what many have now is more of a social system for morality and etiquette. But this social system of morality and etiquette, it's not the means for theosis and salvation. It can teach you how to be a good citizen, how to make people get along with you. But are you really being transformed? Are you being made into God? Are you being united with God? This icon here, many of you may or may not be familiar with it. It's the icon of the Christ of the Sinai. It's one of the earliest icons that our church has because, unfortunately, many of the earlier icons were destroyed during the various iconoclast controversies. So this dates around the 5th century or so. But it's interesting. Many of you probably already know this, but some of you don't, so I'll just explain it. If you notice the Lord's face, how it seems it's kind of odd. You know, there's this, if you almost cut down the line, there's like a distinction. And in the Pantocrator, in every icon, I mean, even here in the iconostase, you can see it. The Lord in his left hand, up above us, the master of all, the ruler of all. In his left hand, he holds the gospel, which is also a symbol of the law. In his right hand, he gives blessing. And so you can actually divide this icon. You can see his eye is a bit fierce here, holding the law. And here, it's a bit more peaceful and giving the blessing. I would submit to you, and it's different. There was times when the caricature is the other way around, where it makes God just more like Zeus. It makes Christ more like Zeus, waiting to zap you with his lightning bolt because you didn't say your prayers at night. This is not God. But there's another caricature, and it's of the sweet buddy Jesus. The sweet buddy Jesus that has made the world sweet, and everything is fine, and there's no problems. And all you need to do is just kind of simply, gently go to sleep. This caricature is problematic. And I think this is why the anti-hero is necessary in the life of a Christian, or at the very least, in the life of a Christian living now in our world, because we're all aware of how dark everything is because we watch the news and this and that. But I would just share this with you. If you can hear me, if you can see me, you're living in luxury. I don't care what level, we are living in luxury. And that luxury is lulling us to a sleep. That luxury is what allows us to live in our own Melnibone, in our own Menzoberranzan, and to turn a blind eye to the dark things that are happening. This luxury is the drug that we are all inhaling in too often, too quickly, and too much of. And it's distorted our vision of who Christ is. Again, I will remind you of the anti-hero. They are doomed to fail before their adventure begins. The blame of that failure lies outside themselves. They offer a critique of social morals and reality. Hopefully this is beginning to remind you of someone very important to you. The anti-heroes introduced to me these key things that without them, I would have never been able to really apprehend Christ, the true living God, the one who saves, who transforms, the one who brings you into the light. Saint Sophrony, he says, in our day, non-Christian mysticism attracts many who despair at the banality and emptiness of the contemporary scene. They are ignorant of the true essence of Christianity. Christianity entails suffering. I would even put in a brackets, full stop, period, absolute statement. Not subjective, not for you, not for that guy, not for the Serbian, the Romanian, not for the Ethiopian. If you're a Christian, this is part of your medicine. Christianity entails suffering, but through suffering, we penetrate the mysteries of being. Suffering makes it possible to comprehend one's own humanity and freedom. In times of distress, the Christian remembers that the whole creation groans, and earth and travail is in pain, and his spirit is conscious of the same life flowing through all of us. To extend the range of our consciousness makes akin with millions of fellow beings scattered over the face of the earth. An enhanced recognition of human suffering begins intense prayer, which transfers all things into the realm of the Spirit. I will tell you, that is the secret. That is the secret. If you feel like you've hit a wall, if you feel like, and forgive me, I'll say it, in many ways, our indulgence in our kind of, our drug of choice, pop-dun fandom, it should no longer be really an escape like it was for me. It should take on another dimension. It should open up to you other pathways to Christ. If you're in Christ, that's the purpose that it should serve. It should illumine these aspects that have been suppressed and hidden. Maybe things about Christ that you were just uncomfortable to look at. Because I will tell you, a great example are these two anti-heroes that I've put before you. They revealed hidden doorways into the depth and the heart of Christ. If you want deeper prayer, you have to experience suffering. If you want deeper connection with Christ, you have to experience suffering. If you want love, you have to experience suffering. The other aspect of the anti-hero, they're doomed to fail before their adventure begins. The Lord in Gethsemane, if it's your will, Lord, let this cup pass from me, but nevertheless, not my will be done, but yours. The Lord was born to suffer. He was born for the cross. Jesus was a failure by earthly standards. He failed. His mission didn't overturn the world in the way the world thought it would. His disciples weren't some victorious heroes who staged a brilliant military coup. If you were to compare Jesus to an earthly leader, he failed and was doomed to fail from the beginning. But we who are his disciples, we who are his beloved, we know that that's not true. But why do we know this? Because we've been given eyes to see it. The natural man doesn't perceive the things of the Spirit. So this is a spiritual reality. The icon there you see is of the great Tsar Lazar of Serbia. And let me tell you a little something about the Serbians. Although, I'm a Serbian priest, I'm no surprise I'm not Serbian, right? But I am Montenegrin. Thank you. I've learned a lot being with the Serbs. And in fact, for me, I just see God's providence in me being with the Serbs. Vivadan, which is the great holiday for the Serbs, which is the commemoration of the Battle of Kosovo, in which Tsar Lazar marches his army in battle with the Turks, and they are soundly defeated. And in that defeat, the uncovering of the true calling of the Serbian people was revealed. Lazar was doomed to fail. He was doomed to fail on the earthly plane. But his defeat was so Christ-like, it revealed, and it is the great day for the Serbian people. I can get behind a people who knows what it means to fail. And in that failure, finding your true self, the anti-hero. Now this word choiceful I keep talking about. There's an old Serbian adage which basically is about teaching your people, teaching your boys, but teaching your people humaneness and heroism, right? Heroism is protecting yourself and your community from aggression and selfishness. But humaneness is to protect others from your own aggression and selfishness. And this is choiceful. Choiceful is essentially protecting others from yourself. Now, some of you may be like, what? What does that mean? The spiritual life, and in our tradition, the first thing that you realize is you are the problem. Your passions, your sins, they are the problem. And it's only in dealing with those things, not exalting them. It's actually in calling yourself to task. That's where the gate to salvation is found. And actually denying yourself for the sake and the love of others and the sake of the love of God. This is the highest calling. This is choiceful. This is what it means to be human. To be humane alone is to recognize the potential within yourself, and often that time, that potential is destructive. Will you bridle that potential in you, or will you celebrate it? Will you put it forward for everyone to suffer from? And again, I would say for modern people, this is what's needed. Because today, the mindset of many Christians is, this is how I feel, this is what I do, this is what I am, too bad for you. That's not the way of the cross. That's not Christ. Patriarch Pavle, who I consider a saint, he says, a person cannot choose the time in which he is born or lives. It's not up to him who his parents are, or the nation he will be born into. But what he is responsible for is how he will act in that given time. Will he be human or inhuman, no matter his nation or parents? Understanding, and this is the thing that the anti-hero also revealed, is that you need to come to a place where you are blameless before God. You've lived a life in which you've practiced choiceful, where you've censored yourself. This is asceticism, where you've learned to give of yourself to others. This ability to say, it doesn't matter my circumstances. We all have passions. We are all embroiled with ways of thinking and being that are destructive to us and to others. The question is not whether we have passions. The question is not whether we are struggling within something within ourselves which is not righteous or God-pleasing or even healthy. The question is, do we embrace it or do we fight against it? Do we choose to say, yes, I have these feelings, yes, I think this way, yes, my culture is like this, but I choose something higher. I choose to go a different way. I choose the cross. The anti-hero offers a critique of social morals and reality. The gentle and kindness of the Christ is needed for us as scared lambs. There is that place for that softness. But the grit of the anti-hero is needed to actually deliver us from hell and death. And this is why the anti-hero is so needed. Because if we present the Christ that coddles, the Christ that doesn't look at the thing that's poisoning us, then how are we saved? This cat, Matthew Barlow, he had this great quote. He said, Jesus is the ultimate anti-hero. In a radical, unprecedented move, Jesus accomplishes the messianic goal by essentially doing what most heroes would never do. He surrenders. Jesus demonstrates that in order to defeat the principalities and powers that govern us, we all must become anti-heroes. What a novel idea. Jesus asks us to refute the status quo and instead envision and live in a world where loving our enemies, turning the other cheek, going the extra mile, and forgiving without counting is our reality. And I would end with this, and I know it's a controversial statement, but I'll stand by it. There's many ways that the fathers have given us to understand the mystery of the cross. But one way for our time, for us living in this modern age of luxury and self-indulgence, and I dare even say delusion, is to understand the cross in this way. Jesus didn't die so that we don't have to. He died to show us the way and that we would follow him. He died to show us the way. We emulate him. We see in him the ultimate show of power, the one who conquered not just himself, but hell and death. The anti-hero is needed for us, Christians, in this time, because this aspect of Christ is the only way I think we're going to see our way out of it. The world is too dark. The forces that have emboldened the darkness are seemingly too strong. What is left for us is the cross, and to change ourselves, to embrace the cross for ourselves. And in doing so, the love that's needed in this world and the wisdom that's needed in this world will come forth from us. But it's only in the cross that that hard ground of our hearts can be broken. Thank you. Forgive me.
No problem.
Forgive me.
So, if you'd like to come up and ask a question, please do so peacefully so that we can finish up.
I'm too far to bite you. It would take too long. It's okay. No questions? Well, good.
I got one for you, at least.
Okay.
Just a shout out to my favorite character in Moorcock is Moonglum, which you quoted there, and there was only one picture showed Moonglum. Yeah. But he's such an important character, and just you see all of his companions. They're so important. The anti-hero can't do what he has to do without those companions. And it's those companions that keep him kind of grounded and connected to love and relationships. So I just want to throw that out there too, because that's my favorite character.
Great. That's great. That's great. Okay.
Well, let's go have something to eat then.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. God bless you.
We have food, and then tomorrow we start early at 9 a.m. Correct?
8:30.
Registration will open at 8. Registration